Hi. So in this video, I want to show you how to initially set up a gradebook in Brightspace. Now, if you bring course content in from Blackboard, the gradebook will be imported from Blackboard. It's not always the cleanest, and some of the rules that apply in Blackboard do not apply in Brightspace. Um, so I want to start just with a blank gradebook structure. So while this course was an import from Blackboard, I have deleted the gradebook entirely. So the gradebook is completely empty as if I had started with a brand new course shell. So to access the gradebook, you click on Assessment and Grades. And the course will drop you into the Setup Wizard menu item from the Grades menu list. So the weird thing about Brightspace is the menu works from the right to the left when you initially start out. Once everything is set up, I'll show you how to set enter grades as your default entry point. So the first thing you need to do is probably run through the grade setup wizard, and that will put all of the grade book options in place for you. So you scroll to the bottom, and what it's going to do is first list out all of the options as they're set now. And these are the default settings. So I'm going to click Start, and that will bring us to the first of 7 steps. Now, I myself am a weighted grader, so I'm going to choose that option. If you use points, go ahead and leave it to points. There's also a formula option, which is a little bit more complex, so we're going to go ahead and skip over that. I'm going to click Continue. We'll get to the second step. Now, the system will automatically provide an adjusted final grade column. Um, Now, what this does is it gives you a secondary column next to the calculated grade column. So when the system calculates the final grade, whether that is simply adding up all the points or calculating out the percentage so that the student knows their final grade based off of a percentage, which is what a weighted grader would do, like me, um, you can't change that calculation. The points that it adds up, the average that it calculates out is fixed. So unlike in Blackboard, which you could just click on that cell in the gradebook and change a student's grade, either by adding more points or removing points, depending upon the reasons you have, in Brightspace, there's no adjusting that calculated column. It is fixed. So if you want to be able to change the final grade for a student within Brightspace, you need this adjusted final grade column. And that will give you a second column where you can enter in grades by hand. So the caveat with this is if you have an adjusted grade column to give you the option to change a student's grade if you so choose, you have to enter in a grade for every student, even if it is exactly matching the calculated column. So please keep that in mind. I'm going to leave the automatically release final grade option checked because I don't want to have to manually release the grades once they're entered in. If we're only using a calculated grade, like so, once the grade is calculated, it will automatically release the grades instantaneously, which is even nicer. With the adjusted grade column, once you enter in all the grades, then the grades will release. So the grade calculation, in Blackboard this was called a running weighted total and a non-running weighted total. What this basically means is at the beginning of the semester, all of the graded items are not yet due, which means there are no submissions, which means there's nothing entered for the grade for every student. This is what's called a null value. So if they drop ungraded items, the null value items within the gradebook are ignored as far as the calculations are concerned. This would give you a running weighted total from Blackboard and a more accurate representation of what the student's grade is at any point within the semester. Now, you have to remember that if you don't enter a 0 for a missed submission, the grade will be artificially inflated because of the missing point value. So if you want to avoid that, you can choose treat ungraded items as a 0, which in Blackboard was termed a non-running weighted total. But what then happens at the beginning of the semester, all the not yet due grade items are all calculating in as zeros towards the final grade average, and it too will give a false representation of what the student's score is. My recommendation is to leave it at the default, which is a running weighted total, drop ungraded items, and then enter the zeros as the due dates arrive to give your students the most accurate representation of their final grade. Whether it's a points or a weighted total, it doesn't matter. On the auto update, you want to have this checked so that as new items are added, the system will automatically update that grade calculation without you having to manually do that. So the grade scheme, this is the default grade scheme. You're not locked into this for every single item, but this is the grade scheme that will be applied to new columns that you add to the gradebook. And then if you want a different grade scheme for that particular item, you can manually change it. So the best bet is to choose the grade scheme that you will be using for the majority of your items. I typically just stick with percentage. We have a 75 or greater for passing. This is primarily intended for the health careers programs that we have on campus. There's a credit, no credit, which is a pass fail. The MCC default grade scheme is the same thing as a letter grade, but the MCC default does not have the plus and minus grade values that the letter grade scheme has. So choose your grade schema and know that this will be the default setting for newly created items, but you're not stuck with them for forever. You can override this default setting for any one of your gradebook columns. Second to last option is managing view display option. So you're the manager of the gradebook. So this is your view. How many decimal places would you like to see displayed in your view of the gradebook? 2 is the default, and I think that's a good number. In Blackboard, if you remember, it could go out to 7, 8, 9 grade decimal places, and that can get very overwhelming. So I think 2 is a nice value. That's the default, so we'll stick with that. And here is the default student view. This is our last page of options. So the default student view gradebook, this is the points grade. So it's displayed as a ratio. So if I'm grading on a 100-point scale, it would show the students earned points with a slash and then a 100. So not everybody grades on a 100-point scale. So if you grade on a non-100-point scale, let's say it's a 42-point scale because you have 42 questions on your exam. Then if you show points grade, it will show that the student earned 40 out of 42 points. Now, you could show weighted grade, which would then convert that ratio into a percentage. You can show the grade scheme symbol, which is, remember that default scheme that we just talked about. So if I had chosen, say, a letter grade, I could choose weighted grade and letter grade, and it would show an 88% for a B plus, for example. Grade scheme color, it will shade in the cell in the gradebook with a color scheme based upon the score that's earned. So a failing score would be red and an awesome score would be blue, shades of those things in between, with I think green being a B-ish area. So you can help with color coding. So these are options. I have a tendency, because I do grade everything on a 100-point scale, to go ahead and leave weighted grade and grade scheme symbol, which I generally set to letter grade. So that will show my students 88 out of 100 is a B plus. That's what they would see in their grade book. Decimal displayed, I typically like to remove the decimals from the default setting of 2, because I like to avoid conflict with students of why did I not up round their grade when they had a 79.48, then that should be an 80. It wasn't an 80, it was a 79.48. Math says round down. So I try to avoid those arguments and just by putting a 0 and show the students whole numbers. Um, and then you can also show how the grade is calculated if you want. I typically just leave that go as well. This is the default setting. I think it's a good choice. Number of characters to display for text items. This is how many characters you want the category columns to show the students before it chops it off. So we'll leave it at the default of 50. So we click continue and then we're done. So these are the settings as we chose them through the setup wizard. And we click finish when we're done. after we review them and we like them. Now, if you want to change any one of those settings down the line, you don't have to run through the setup wizard every time. You can just click on the settings link here, and that will bring you back into an area where you can access any and all of these settings. So I'm going to remove, say, for example, the grade scheme color from my gradebook. I don't want to get flooded with a rainbow of colors. Um, I also don't necessarily need to see their grade scheme symbol. I know how to do math, so I'm just going to go ahead and stick with the weighted grade for my view, and then go ahead and click Save. So those are how you can go ahead and update and change any of these gradebook settings. So that's the setup wizard and the different settings that you have in your gradebook. If you have any questions on setting up these options in your gradebook, go ahead and give us a call at the CTL or send us an email or even come on in. We're in the LTC building in room 218.